everybody. I'm Monica Benke. I'm the Chief Growth Officer from Iron Horse. Welcome. We're so glad that you're here with us today. Joining me in our conversation today, we have Colin Campbell from Sales Hacker. Welcome. Sandra Freeman from Demandbase, and our very own Ellen Smoley, who is the head of marketing at Iron Horse. We are here today to talk about the buyer's journey. This is part of our series with the Enterprise Growth Alliance, which is a group of partners that are working together as an ecosystem group to try and bring additional value to our clients by working together. We had one webinar a few weeks ago, so I encourage you to go in and look at the on-demand of that if you didn't have a chance to, that talked about the beginning of the buyer's journey. It talked about where do people go to look for trends, how do they start their discovery process, what's important to them during those stages of the buyer's journey. Today, we are talking about the latter half of the buyer's journey. So you are now in the journey where you're starting to explore solutions. You want to make a purchase decision, and we want to find out the best practices there. We have an ebook that is both parts of the buyer's journey, and we'll refer to some of the data in that ebook. But what is even better and more interesting is our guests have even more data and their experience to bring to the table. So we will start off. And the first thing that we wanted to talk about was, as people are doing exploration for their buyer's journey, one of the things that really came out during the ebook is the need for transparency. People want to know about products. Of course, that seems sort of obvious, but there was a real desire for transparency. And one of the places that really popped up high was pricing transparency. And I think that that's something that's really, really interesting as buyer's journey have become more and more self-serve and digital. Pricing in some cases, especially for anything that's a little bit complex, is almost one of the last bastions of I'm not going to share that, I'm not going to give it to people. So I wanted to open up first of all, with a poll for you in the audience to say, how do you feel about putting pricing on your website? Do you love it and you do it already? Would you like to do it, but you can't get it done? Are you not sure how that would ever happen, or it will never happen? So let's let that poll go and let's start the conversation. Ellen, Colin, and Sandra, how do you feel about having pricing on your websites? Do you do it? How do you do it? Sandra, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure thing. At Demandbase, we had an OKR this year for the self-driving focus, right? And I thought, well, that sounds interesting, sure. But we really put a lot of effort into that. Product tours, maturity assessments, and a pricing calculator. And I've seen the results on it, and I'm a total believer now. I get it, right? So on our pricing calculator, we saw 3 times more people will participate in that and use that calculator over submitting and asking for a pricing information. And so it just really gives the buyer what they're looking for. It makes it easier, and it takes less effort on our side as well. So I think there's efficiency all around.
Do you think that I assume that you think people want to do that so they don't have to talk to a salesperson? Is that a fair assertion?
Yeah, I definitely do think that's a fair assertion. That's the whole thing about 90% is self-driving. Like, you find that before you want to learn on your own. And so we just have to enable that.
Yeah. And do you think that the people that are doing the calculator are as qualified as the people that might reach out and have the conversation? Did you find any conversion difference between the two, or have you had a chance to even look at that?
Yeah, it's pretty early on, but we're seeing definitely every quarter it's growing in terms of the percentage of pipe and the percentage of win that have participated in tours and calculators. So I'll keep you in the loop on this, but I'm all for it. And I know, Colin, you were saying before we were prepping for this, your competitors are going to see your pricing anyway.
They probably have got it. But Colin, the question I have for you, one of the pieces of data that we found was marketing leaders are more interested in the price transparency. Everybody was interested, but marketing leaders are more interested than sales leaders in price transparency. Why do you think that is?
So my guess there is that the marketing tech landscape is more mature, and people know a little bit more what they're going to get. The reason they were more interested is because sales leaders were more interested in hearing about integrations, implementation services, onboarding, right? That was their preference for hearing, like, in this buying stage. That's the information that they wanted most. And I think that is because the sales tech world is a little bit younger, and it's not as well established. There's a lot of newer tools. You don't know where the integrations are going to be. It's oftentimes hard to see a path to implementation. A lot of times you're implementing a type of tool, like a conversational intelligence tool, for the very first time. It's not a rodeo you've been to before. That's my guess.
Okay. So do you think salespeople are going to be willing to call up and find prices? Is that your experience? Or do you think that you would want to experiment with more pricing transparency?
I definitely do want to experiment more with pricing transparency. When it comes to, this isn't something that I oversee at Outreach, and Sales Hacker offers like services that are very, very difficult to price. But my position here is not that you should always show pricing or that you should not show pricing, but that you should ask the question and be intentional. I'm in favor of zigging when others are zagging. As a differentiator, I think it's hard to differentiate on products now. It's a relatively even playing field. It's a little bit easier to differentiate on your go-to-market motion and the way that you provide service to your customers even before they sign with you. So if you think about the buying experience as part of the customer experience, if nobody else provides pricing, maybe you do it. If everybody else provides pricing, maybe you offer an option that's a little bit more interesting than just window shopping for a price, something a little bit more consultative. But I'm in favor of, figuring it out for yourself. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule.
Ellen, you're also in a services company that is 100% services here at Iron Horse. Do you think we'll ever put pricing on our website?
I think that we might put something on our website similar to packaging, or letting you into purchasing more of what that package could be. But just like Tony mentioned in the chat, there's a lot of customizations you can do as a service company. How much of a service do you want? What kind of services do you want? And it's extremely hard, but there could be something like an ROI calculator, like Sandra was mentioning, that have seen really great results. And I definitely think it's not a yes or no. It is definitely, what is your industry? Who is your persona? And use some personalization tools to figure out, showing it to a certain audience and not showing it to a certain audience, which one performs the best. There's some very interesting case studies out there, just depending on what that industry is, small businesses or larger businesses, and what they want to see. So running some optimizations would help you answer those questions.
Yeah. I wonder if there's any value in providing almost pricing, I don't know how you do this, but almost pricing thresholds. So it's kind of like, expect to pay at least this much, so people can almost disqualify them if they kind of go, I'm just not even in the ballpark. Just like when you make personal purchases, it's kind of like there's a difference if I'm going to shop at store A, which I know kind of goes with these price points, or store B, which has, call it furniture, these price points versus these price points. And you kind of know when you self-select. And if there's a way to be able to do that for clients, or do you think the industry, especially Sandra in MarTech, is already taking care of that with review sites and things like that?
Well, it's interesting because I just literally was shopping for a sponsorship. So as a marketer, I want to sponsor something, and I needed to know what the range is. I need to understand, am I even in the budget for this? Will this be a Q4 thing that I'm going to do, or do I need to so sharing that information with me is very helpful. And as if I can get it faster versus having to wait and, ask for it, I can, move faster through my decision-making myself. So I like even ranges just to help people get some kind of sense.
Yeah, so you could start for this much, and it can go for any amount of money, but you can get into the game, at this price point. I was also thinking about, in general, I mean, we talked a little bit about pricing. We can talk a little more about in general transparency, but let's go and take a look at the poll. Steph, can you put the poll up and see, what responders said about their pricing? Okay, we'd love to do it. Not a ton of votes, but more people on the no side than on the yay side, on the nay side than the yay side. Thanks, Steph. And I think that it could be, without knowing who the companies are, it could be that they are services companies and those sorts of things, or it could be, internal policies. If you believe as a marketer that you think more pricing exposure and or more transparency, and it could be ranges, or it could be thresholds, or it could be packages, or it could be, Sandra, like you are, kind of going full on with the configurator. How would you convince sales, that you want to expose that because they may feel that that's something that they own, or the rest of the C-suite to say, hey, we want to have this kind of transparency? Sandra, how did you go about it? Or was it something that somebody else came up with and said, go do it?
Yeah, I mean, it was more just a general philosophy about self-driving vision, and that we need to get more out there for people and let them have their own experiences and make that easier. And that's the frictionless buying process. That's definitely something we're embracing and really moving forward with. So it's at the company level and agreed to at the OKR level.
Other ideas?
So you mentioned earlier, Monica, that one of the big reasons people are afraid to put pricing on their website is that competitors will see it. I think the reality is that your competitors already have a pretty darn good idea of what your pricing is, if they're, doing their jobs at all. The other big reason I've heard is that, pricing is the last reason. It's it's an excuse to get a salesperson on the phone with a customer.
Right. Yeah.
That they have to talk to us to get it. And that way, I guess the reasoning is that we can kind of trick them into like the next step in the sales process, and the next step and the next step. And it's that mentality that we have to like withhold information to trick the customer into talking to us, that just signals a mistrust in your own product, a mistrust in your salespeople, and a mistrust in your customer's ability to make the best decision for them. But when you really think about it, this is how I would try to convince sales teams to be open to this, because they love having pricing private because it forces a conversation. I would say it makes the buying process less efficient. Guess what's on the other side of the buying process? The selling process. Do you want to talk to people who are already more qualified because they understand that they have the budget to buy what you have on offer and they want it? Or do you want to talk to people who like maybe have $1 in their pocket and are kicking tires? You can't have it both ways. Salespeople complain all the time about tire kickers. So if you want to get rid of that, just put the pricing out there.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I almost, as a marketer, almost cringed when you said, you're tricking people into having the conversation, because when you express it in those terms, it does. It feels very, I don't want to do that. For me, that would be a convincing argument if I were on the other side of that. Let's switch gears a little bit. In terms of, it's still along the idea of transparency and exploration. And Colin, you brought this up at the beginning, the desire and the importance of information about integrations and implementations. When people are buying technology, it is more important in many cases by our responders. Over 400 people responded to this survey than the functionality and the benefits of the product itself. It's like, can I get it implemented? Who's going to help me do it? What does it integrate with? So Colin, what's your kind of thoughts in terms of how do we as marketers talk about that and leverage that and kind of empathize with that need?
Well, I'll add to, so I was inspired by the data points in the ebook that y'all wrote, but I wanted to find out just how much sales buyers would be willing to pay for implementation services. So I created a really informal LinkedIn poll. It was a would you rather. And the two options, I said, would you rather have a completely free sales tech stack with no implementation or onboarding help? But you get it all for free. All that budget gets to go towards hiring new sellers or an even better President's Club or something. Or would you rather have full price tech stack, but you get all the implementation help? And like 80% of people said they'd rather pay full price. They'd rather keep spending all the money on tech. Clearly, what they're saying is the value they get out of it is the implementation and onboarding help. And I think that's because tech is such an entrenched part of all of our workflows now. And really, when you look at like a sales tech stack or marketing tech stack, the workflows aren't separate. It's one big go-to-market cycle for all of us. It's a connected journey for both the buyer and the seller. And that means that the tools that stitch that journey together have to be stitched together themselves.
Yeah, that's a really interesting poll. I actually saw your poll on LinkedIn, and I took it and felt the same way. It's interesting that people feel the need even to have external to the vendor support for implementation. So Ellen, we do a lot of that at Iron Horse. We help clients with their tech stack implementations. Why do you think people would come to us rather than go straight to a vendor? What do you think the value is that having an independent third party?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest values is that we don't just have eyes on that one technology. We've got eyes and expertise in a lot of technologies to make sure that they are connected and integrated, and stepping back as a marketer, understanding how an integrated campaign works with all of these different tools that we have. There's this crazy Gartner stat that I think it's 40% of our MarTech is being used right now, which is just crazy. So as an agency, we strive to make sure that number gets up in the 90s and that we are using the technology that we have purchased. So, we have a lot of expertise in all of these different tech to make sure that the buyer's journey is cohesive throughout from the beginning to the very end.
So Sandra, how do you feel about that? Are we taking money out of your pocket?
I'm pretty captivated by this book. It's called Jolt: Overcoming Customer Indecision. And it basically says that 40% of pipeline stalls because of indecision. And so I was captivated because, of course, I want that to be way less and to move forward. And the essence was indecision is there. We're afraid, we're fear of messing up, that the implementation isn't going to work and that no one's going to adopt it. And it's shelfware. So the fear of messing up, not just fear of messing out, but fear of messing up is really what's holding people back. And I'm, really thinking about that as a marketer. How do you make sure you are a trusted partner? How do you make sure you're very clear about how you're going to get to value, how you're going to get to ROI? I've seen some studies that say, the majority of buyers want ROI in the first year. Yeah. So are you making that clear? What are your steps to get there? Your crawl, walk, run. What's the plan? Here's some examples. Here's specifics. So I believe in it. And I'm looking forward to decreasing that 40%.
Yeah, that's an interesting piece of data as well. I think, it's a little bit of a softball because the fact that you all are here kind of says that we are believers collectively in this thought. And I've observed it for years and years and years. Companies, even functions within an organization, anybody that tries to play a solo game these days, especially in anything to do with B2B marketing, I think is going to be really, really hard pressed to be successful because everything is so interconnected. Success takes interconnection. Interconnection takes an ecosystem of vendors and partners and technologies, etc. And people trying to play the solo game are probably going to be very, very hard pressed to be successful. They may in the short term because they've got some cool new technology, like they come out with something that's great and new and very unique. I think that it's short-lived, because people bring up features of technology to sameness in a shorter and shorter cycle time. In the past, you might have had differentiation for 2 years, 3 years. Now you might have differentiation for a year. So if you then lose your differentiation, how do you bring value to the table? And, partnerships is definitely a piece of that. The other thing that's a piece of it, which is kind of the third part of this conversation, is about the buying experience. So if we pick up on this thought, and we saw this in the survey, and we just kind of see it in general, there is a lot of sameness out there. There's very few places where there is, one option and no other options. We're generally competing with other companies. And oftentimes, in certain industries, I have some clients where they say, we live in the sea of sameness. Everybody has the same offer. It looks the same. We talk about it in the same way. The messaging is the same. How do we distinguish? How do we differentiate ourselves, in this sea of sameness? So who's got a strategy? Like, I have an idea, but before I start any strategies for differentiating in a sea of sameness?
I love that terminology, sea of sameness. I'm going to have to use that. I definitely think listening and watching for signals and understanding what people are interested in, and then being able to deliver more relevant information at the right time, using technology to do that is really important. So we see a much better conversion rates when we do that. And, it's just a good practice.
So personalization through insight.
Yep.
I would say being where your people are. So maybe listening to your community. If you're in communities, listening to what your people are saying there, responding within communities, and making sure that you've got your product information on off domain as well. Because there's some stats that, where people are not just shopping on your website, they're getting information elsewhere. And so making sure that your story is cohesive. You've got a very cohesive story outside of your website too.
I will make a count. I'm usually a big fan of, like I said earlier, zigging when others are zagging. I say to my team all the time, you can't be better if you're not different. So just think of anything different and do that and find out if it's better later. But I'll make an argument now to the contrary of my usual position, which is that if you're sailing in a crowded ocean of competitors, it means you found a lot of fish. So maybe it's a good thing to all be sailing around in the same market, to have decided, hey, this is the best way to go to market. So like I said earlier as well, I'm a fan of just making these decisions intentionally. And I think that sometimes differentiation is taken on as a task that is like, oh, it's going to lead us to the goose that laid the golden egg. It's going to make every little difference in the world. I don't know that differentiation always does that. Sometimes it's just straight up execution, and how well you do the same thing as everybody else.
That's an interesting point, and it reminds me of a conversation that I had with a friend who is an analyst about this idea of value during, like the experience value during the buying process. So if I have two products that are essentially the same, what could tip the difference? To your point, it's almost execution. It's that those moments where you are delivering greater value during the buyer experience. The example that she gave me, which I'll share because I think it's a really interesting example, was her son was applying for colleges, and she goes, you know what? Like they all have the same criteria. They all have the campuses that look the same. They all have everything felt very the same. And her son, I think, was fortunate to get acceptances from a lot of different colleges. And then he had to make his choice. And these days, if you've got kids in college, that the information actually comes during a portal. online through a portal, but you also get the piece of paper, right? You get the big envelope, and that's a very exciting moment. And apparently, one of the schools, rather than just send the piece of paper, they sent an entire box. And in the box, you open it up, there's confetti and the colors of the school. There was an acceptance card. You open the card up, it had the cheer song from the school. Like that moment where they knew, that student, if they got multiple acceptance, is now going to make a choice, right? It's just like a vendor, right? They all have the same thing. Now I'm at the moment of making a choice, and they created that was a really fascinating moment. I kept thinking, how can we do that from a B2B perspective to create in this where things are the same, to create buyer experiences in those moments that create a more visceral reaction. It's like unpacking in the old days. It's still today, but that's what Apple did so well, unpacking your iPhone. And it was like an experience. So thoughts on that? Like, how do we do that, in the world of buying groups, B2B, ROI, and those sorts of things?
One of the things that I think is interesting to think about here is that I'm seeing a big trend in chief revenue officers, where that term should always have been holistic revenue, like a purview over the entire life cycle. It wasn't. It was just sales and marketing. I'm seeing a trend now where chief revenue officers also oversee success teams, account management teams. So I think there's an opportunity to differentiate, and I think people historically have underinvested in customer experience. So, rather than say sending an interesting package to prospects, maybe you send an interesting package or build in an interesting experience for people who have been your customer for a year or 2 years, or maybe they achieve an outcome using your services or your product, and you give them a little surprise congratulations, send them a piñata and a little bat with candy inside. I don't know. But, we live in a world now where everybody can post to social media. So in the spirit of building a community, like we said earlier, building a movement around what you and your company stand for, let your customers come on board with you in that and create moments for them, and then and allow and enable them to share those moments with the world, and like invite them to post on social media their cool moment of busting up that piñata you sent them.
Yeah. I've heard it called a celebration in a box. Like, what could you then send? Now you have to make sure they're in the office, I guess. But like, what could the group celebrate together, or a milestone? I love that.
That's a cool idea. Any ideas, Ellen? I don't want to cut you off. What's your ideas?
So mine is not as beautiful as a surprise box, but I was looking at some data the other day that Chili Piper survey or looked at 100 of the top SaaS companies. And to be different and to stand out, it can be about responsiveness. When they submitted contact us forms, it took 2 days for most of these companies, an average of 2 days to get back to you. That's crazy. So just being responsive and being willing to be on the phone quickly, because this buying decision goes in some cases, very quickly. We're all very busy. So just being responsive can set you apart for sure.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, I think so. And I also think that the tone of your responsiveness is really good. And I'll give you an example, because I like what you said, Ellen. We were doing some work for a client, and part of what we do as a service is we almost like mystery shop them, right? It's kind of like we go and we ask for everything and we see how they get back to us. This client did like staffing, right? Like talent acquisition. And they came back and said, hey, we really fit really well with companies that are of this size that hire these many people. It seems like your company isn't quite the right size for us. If we're wrong, please let us know. But in the meantime, for companies your size, here's some great, resources you might, find valuable. And I thought, that's the nicest DQ I've ever got. They responded. They didn't just DQ me and just never respond at all. They sent it in a way that was extremely polite, that opened the opportunity to say maybe they were wrong, and gave us some resources. And I thought that's a great differentiator to your point, Ellen.
That is an excellent point. There's this movement towards ABM, and I love that people are thinking about selling to an account. But if you think even beyond that, if you try to sell to an account and a few of the decision makers at the account decide that it's not the right time, or you decide you're not the right solution for them, you got to keep in mind that those human beings will probably work at a different account in the future. So there's like a people-centric, account. I don't even know what you would name it.
Yeah.
Person-based marketing. Where you can take an even longer view.
I think that's a wonderful point and a great place to finish our webinar as we're coming up on the 30-minute mark. And I appreciate Colin, Ellen, and Sandra, your time today. And join us again as we come back in the fall, because we're doing our next survey, and our next survey is all about investments, marketing investments. What are people buying? What are they disinvesting in? And I think that'll be a really interesting conversation as well. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation with you, and we will see you all very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Monica.